Hi class, this is lesson 8.6 on solving quadratic equations by factoring. So today we are going to be kind of reviewing from last chapter when we did some factoring. And so the first thing we need to know is this zero product property, and this just tells us that if we have two quantities and they are multiplied to equal 0, that at least one of them has to be equal to 0. So this is kind of our first step in factoring these quadratic equations. So first of all, here we already have an already factored set of binomials. So what this property says is that we can set each one separately equal to 0 and then solve from there. So if I go ahead and solve each of those, I find out that x could equal 7. Or if I go ahead and solve this one, x could equal -2. And if we plug those back in and check those, if x equaled either one of those, then I would still get a value of 0 when I go ahead and multiply those through after simplifying. Okay, so same thing over here then. I'm going to go ahead and set each one equal to 0. And this one is already solved for us then. And then over here we find out that x could also equal 2. So 2 and 0 would be our two solutions. Okay, same thing on these next ones. We could have x equals 0. We could have x plus 4 equals 0. And when I solve that, I get a -4. So my two answers then would be 0 and -4. Okay, and then same thing on this next one. Set each one equal to 0. And then solve from there. So x could equal -4 again, or x could equal 3. Okay, so that's kind of going to be our second step now. We're going to back it up before that happens and go from when we have an equation in standard form. So if this happens, we need to factor first, and then we'll be able to use the zero product property. So on these ones, we want to go ahead and factor this part of the equation first. And we always want to make sure it's set equal to 0. So like you see on these other ones, we're going to need to get it so that everything is on one side and then we've got just 0 on the other side. So think back to last chapter when we go ahead and factor these. I'm going to have x times x out front here. Remember, this goes back to foiling. And then I need to think to myself, okay, what are my factors of 8? That would add to give a -6. Now I know I'm going to need to have them both be negative, so that way they multiply to give me that +8, but add to give me a -6. So I think this is going to end up being -4 and -2. -4 times -2 gives me a +8, and -4 plus -2 gives me a -6. So now that I've got them factored, now I can do what I did on the previous slide and set each one equal to 0. So I'll have x minus 4 equals 0 and x minus 2 equals 0. And then if I solve from there, I'll get x could equal 4 or x could equal 2. So my two solutions then would be 4 and 2. Okay, now on this next one, you can notice that I don't have them set equal to 0 yet, so I need to fix that before I do anything else. So I need to subtract 21 from both sides so that this will cancel and be equal to 0. So I'll have x squared plus 4x minus 21 equals 0. Now I can factor my left side. So I'm going to factor that into two binomials. They're still going to equal 0. Start with my x squared, and then I need to think, okay, what are my factors of -21? That would add to give me 4. So I know I'm going to need 1 plus and 1 minus in order to equal -21. And my factors of 21, I would want to go with 7 and 3. And so I would want to do a +7 and a -3 so that those add to equal a +4. So now from here I can set each one equal to 0. So I'll have x plus 7 equals 0 and x minus 3 equals 0. And then my two solutions would be -7 and +3. Okay, so then my next one, I can see that it's already set equal to 0. So I can go ahead and just factor each one. So I'll have my x squareds out, my x's out in front to equal my x squared. And then I need to think, okay, what are my factors of 36 that would add to equal negative 12? And I know they're both going to need to be negative, so that way they add to give me a negative, yet multiply to give me a positive. And I think I'm going to want to go with 6 and 6. So go ahead and set each of them equal to 0. And then if you'll notice, you're going to get x equals 6 over here, and then you're going to get the same thing over here. So when we go to write our final answer, we'll just say that there's only one solution, unlike the other ones that all had 2. This one will just have one solution of x equals 6. Okay, and then the last one, this one, remember we want to set it up correctly so that we have it equal to 0 on both sides. So I'm going to add 2x squared to both sides, so that way those will cancel out over here and I'll have 0. And then I'll have 2x squared plus 20x plus 50, and then make sure you note how I'm writing it in standard form. Now this one's a little unique because you could actually look at it a couple different ways. What I'm going to do, because I think what's maybe a little easier, is I'm going to go ahead and use greatest common factor to factor this further. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a 2 out of every single term. So I'll have x squared, 20 divided by 2 is 10x, and then 50 divided by 2 is 25x. Okay, so after I take that 2 out, then I can factor what's left. So I'm going to take this x squared plus 10x plus 25, and now go ahead and factor that. So I'll have my x's here, and then I'll have plus 5 and plus 5, since those add to give me 10, yet multiply to give me 25. And then I just need to remember I need to bring that 2 down that was out in front there, and then all of that's equal to 0. And then here's what happens is, so each one of these sections, so here, here, and here, each of these we would set equal to 0. Now this first one, 0 does not equal 2, so this would not be a solution to the equation. So what I want to just focus on is my x plus 5, and set that equal to 0. So x would equal negative 5. And then since this other one's the exact same, it's going to be just like that last problem I did in purple there, where we're just going to have one solution. So my only solution would be x equals negative 5. Alright, so these last ones then, I think you've got just 4 left to go, and then the story problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have you go ahead and try out these 4. So now would be a good time to go ahead and pause the video, try these 4, and see how you do. Make sure that they're set equal to 0 though first. Like this one is already good to go, so you're ready to factor. The other 3 though, you're going to need to subtract whatever's off over here. So the 5, the 30x, and the 8, you'll need to move those to the other side first so that you can set the equation equal to 0. So go ahead and try those 4 and then see how you did with the answer key. And then before you go, we're going to do this last story problem together. So it says the height of a toy rocket in meters can be approximated by this equation of h equals negative 6t squared plus 42t, where h is standing for our height in meters and t is the time in seconds. So we are going to find the time that it would take for the rocket to reach the ground after it's been launched. So we are going to find the time, that means we are going to solve for t. And we want to know how long it takes to reach the ground. So if it's on the ground, that means that rocket's height is 0. So our equation is going to look like this, where 0 is our height, and then equals the rest of the equation. Okay, so we're going to factor this now similarly to what we did on those other ones. Now this one I'm going to need to factor with GCF first, since this is not in standard form yet. So I'm going to go ahead and take out a negative 6t from everything. And when I do that here, I'll be left with t. And then I'll need to have a negative 7 left over here. So my 2 chunks of my equation now are negative 6t and t plus negative 7. So each of those then is what I'm going to set equal to 0. Okay, so then I can go ahead and solve from there. So I'm going to divide by negative 6, and you can probably do that one in your head, but t will equal 0. And then over here, t will equal 7. Okay, so it's asking us how long it takes to reach the ground. Now this solution right here is where it started. At time 0, it started on the ground. So our answer then would want to be at t equals 7, and this is standing for seconds, I believe. Yep. So at t equals 7 seconds is when it comes back to the ground. So t equals 0, started at 0 seconds on the ground, and then it hits the ground again at 7 seconds. Okay. Go ahead and, like I said, if you haven't already, try those previous 4 we skipped, and then make sure you check your answers and refer back to your notes then as you start your worksheet.